folks connecting to audio, and that way everybody can join us from the beginning.
And welcome, everybody. We're definitely excited for everyone to come. We know that a lot of individuals are on a much needed vacation right now. As you've been going through the summer, a lot of people, if you haven't taken vacation, you need to take vacation. You need to get some time to recharge. If you've taken vacation, then this is your recharge look. So welcome. And so we're a little light now today on the industry side. We know that. As we continue through the pandemic and all the other support that is needed, we graciously and wholeheartedly thank our health industry experts and leaders and all the support partners, because together we'll get through this one day at a time. But it is a little light today, but we do welcome everyone and thank you for joining us this morning.
Great.
Thanks, James. Hey, I'm gonna just keep us going here. Good morning, everyone. My name is Wendy Price. I serve as the Director for Workforce Development and Planning at Seattle Children's. And James and Ryan, you both did a fantastic job creating a welcoming environment. I also want to welcome everyone to our summer HILT meeting. I also serve as one of the HILT captains, so I'm proud of that and really honored to be a part of this collective. And just because we do have some new partners and new folks here, just a reminder that the health industry leadership table is really a network. It's a network of healthcare providers, large and small. We're hospitals, we're community clinics, long-term care providers, behavioral health centers. And HILT has been a place where we can all come together just really to collaborate around some of our shared most pressing workforce issues. We really focus on workforce strategies, opportunities, and places where we can collectively partner to move our region's healthcare workforce forward. It's also a place where we consistently and at scale can connect with our education partners, our community-based organizations across our regions, and our workforce intermediaries to really be effective around implementing coordinated strategies. So it's been a really robust, productive space. We're about 3 years old, and it is what we all make of it. So super glad that everybody is here and in this conversation today. We have a lot to cover. I will review the agenda really quickly, but before I do that, I do want to take this opportunity on behalf of the HILT captains and the team and all of you, and thank our conveners for all of the hard work that you put in really making this possible. So just really quickly, I wanted to thank you, Lindsay and Ryan and James and Shalana and Liesel. We could not have HILT without all of you. It takes a lot of work and a lot of effort to keep this all coordinated and moving and planned and executed, and we couldn't do it without you, so thank you so much. And I also wanted to just create a little bit of space before we dive into our topical agenda, just for a temperature check on how our organizations are doing, particularly the healthcare organizations. This has been all of us collectively, every one of us on this call. We've all been in amidst of an 18-month pandemic. We've been reckoning with systemic oppression and institutional racism. We have seen surges come and go. We've been adjusting our organizations professionally and personally. There's a lot happening and everybody's carrying a lot on our plate. So we thought we'd take just a few minutes, about 5 or 10 minutes or so, to just do a check-in. For those of you that are interested in sharing, coming off mute and sharing, you could also put some thoughts in the chat if you'd like to on behalf of your organization, just how you're faring. What are some of the new challenges that you're facing and ways that you're coping? So I'll just kick us off and start a little bit from the Seattle Children's perspective. I'm sure we're not alone in sharing that things are pretty intense. Things are tough right now. And in addition to increasing patient surges and really very real staffing shortages, as we have kind of this unprecedented, I think, migration across our workforce, across our economy, and across healthcare in general. We do have teams that feel very strained, and we've been at this a long time. And so our teams feel tired, but definitely very focused on bringing supports every day to workforce members and colleagues that can keep everyone going and at it, because because our teams are we are our teams and we need them very much. And then just on I'm sure all of you, it's possible all of you are aware of the very public allegations that came against Seattle Children's about 9 months ago or so around systemic oppression, acts of institutional racism, and health disparities. So just as an update for all of you as partners in this space, our board created an assessment committee who then commissioned Covington and Burlington early this year to do a very intensive assessment around Seattle Children's policies, practices, data, outcomes, resourcing. That took about 6 months, and there were about over 1,000 constituents engaged, internal workforce members, patients and families, community members, a lot of engagement and a lot of feedback shared. And then ultimately, our board did release some of Covington's 8 recommendations from their assessment and research. And so we are hard at work aligning our anti-racism organizational change plan along with alongside those 8 recommendations from Covington to the extent that we have those details, and very much have an interdisciplinary kind of cross-institutional committee that is creating an action plan in very rapid form. And so we recognize we need to be transparent and rebuild trust internally and externally and be authentic. And so there's just, along that entire spectrum, there's a lot happening at Children's, and we just show up every day wanting to support one another and do the right work and make the right impact for patients and families. So just thought I would share that update for everyone's awareness, and wanted to just open it up for others that feel like sharing. I will maybe stop talking, and if you want to come off mute and just share what's happening at your organization quickly.
Wendy, thanks for that. That's like a lot. As far as for Sound, which some of you may know as formerly Sound Mental Health, we decided back in June to make vaccinations a requirement for our entire agency. So we gave people, sorry about that, if I put my phone on mute. We gave everyone time to process, to adjust, and to, I hate the word compliant, but to receive their vaccinations by August 23rd. So we did lots of things in between. I'm very happy with what we were able to do. We were able to accommodate 14 people. So out of about 750 individuals, we had 14 accommodations, and unfortunately had to separate 5 team members. So we felt that the numbers would be a lot higher that we would end up losing, especially in a workforce shortage. So that has been very stressful all in itself, because we have to make sure our clients are still cared for. But a lot of our clients are not vaccinated. So, you know, that is our responsibility to cause no harm to our clients. So that's why we took the stance that we did. So that's a brief update about what we've recently gone through. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Charlotte. Very real. That's very real, I think, across all of our areas. So thanks for sharing that. Anyone else?
I'll jump in here. This is Nick Jackal from Cambia Grove. I'm very new to this conversation. This is my first meeting with you all. So thank you, James, and the group for having me. It's really a privilege to be catching up with all the great work that you've been doing and figuring out if and where Cambia Grove might be able to play some support or a role. I thank you, Wendy, for kicking off this part of the agenda and really the invitation to unpack and dive into the complexities of these issues. I think what I would add, it's hard to add to what's already been shared. It's been a wonderful perspective. I think one thing that I'm reflecting on from our perch here at Cambia Grove, and I should quickly note that Cambia Grove is a health innovation hub under the Cambia Health umbrella, and our sole purpose is to identify barriers that inhibit impactful innovations from moving forward and lowering those barriers. Workforce challenges that you know all too well are a very real barrier to many of those innovations from flowing forward. So systemic racism has showed up very directly as a barrier in moving innovations forward. And so what I'll simply just add or try to add to this conversation is a note of optimism around what we can do in these moments. This is certainly a challenging time, but as that arc moves towards progress, it will move, but it will move with us all helping it bend and forcing it to move in that direction. And I think rooms like this and others around our state are gathering to do that. And I just am buoyed by the focus of this conversation in this room to do better, to move our industry forward in the healthcare space and society forward. So there's a lot of reasons to be concerned, no doubt, but I think a lot of reasons to be optimistic too, and so honored to be able to be part of both conversations as we move forward.
Nick, thank you so much. I love that optimistic perspective and really the invitation for us all to lean into solutions and making things better. So thank you for being here, and we welcome you. Anyone else want to come off mute and just do a quick temperature check?
Wendy, this is Dan Ferguson, coming in from the east side of the mountains. I think I just have to acknowledge that, we've been at this a long time, and that the potential for kind of pandemic fatigue is so real. And so I think it's really a helpful reminder to just think about taking care of ourselves personally, and think about all those kind of protective factors that we engage in to just kind of be able to maintain and stay with this and to get through this. I just think this is really important. So I really appreciate, for example, the kind of the fodder and the kind of the welcoming that happened early on in this meeting, talking about tennis and pickleball. And it's, we're friendlies. We know each other, we engage. And I just think, I think that's really important, particularly because for many of us, this is our connectedness. This is how we work every day. And so I think it's important to just remind ourselves of the importance of that connection and to support each other and to get creative with taking care of ourselves.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Dan. I would just share, I know we have a lot to cover today, so we'll dive in, but in recognition of what you just described, I know on our team, at least at Seattle Children's, we've really prioritized building in moments of connection. We have so many people that are working in a remote space, but also so many people that are working so hard on site every day and delivering patient care, that we have to be intentional to build those moments, even if it is with the sports that we like, or what you see out your window, or just those moments of connection. And it might not feel like we have time to do it, but we try to make that time, because that's where our humanness comes through. So thanks for sharing that. Well, I appreciate everyone that weighed in, and again, feel free to chime in the chat if you want to just do a little sharing of where your organization is at and how you're faring. Real quick transition to the rest of our meeting today. We have a pretty full agenda, and James, I think you were going to put a link to that in the chat to our agenda. We are going to do a deep dive into the talent pipeline committee work. It's hitting new stride. We have new funding and a new coordinator. So that means we have the potential for new and big impact. So stay tuned for that. Well, that's coming right up. We're going to hear shorter recaps of two other bigger topics we've been engaged in, and that's around our behavioral health committee, as well as our ongoing HILT anti-racism discussion. So hear updates on those. And then we have a feature focus conversation on our nursing shortage, where we'll hear from the Washington Center for Nursing on a new report, and also get your input on some nursing pipeline strategies that we all feel would be worth our collective time. So a lot of high value topics here. And then just before we shift there, just a bit of a recap on what's happened over the summer. We have these meetings quarterly. Summer has been very, very busy for HILT. Let me just give you a quick update on those activities. In June, we held a Lunch and Learn webinar and invited other healthcare organizations that would be interested in the IT healthcare IT pathway partnership that's been shaping up between Seattle Children's and the Seattle colleges. So there actually is a scholarship available. Seattle Children's is offering 10 scholarships. So I want to put a plug out there. I think we're still accepting applications for students who are interested in access to IT healthcare careers. We also had a quarterly education and information exchange. And these exchanges are pretty new, and it's our HILT's way of consistently connecting with our healthcare organizations to our community colleges and our four-year schools to align on that pipeline, that healthcare workforce pipeline. So in July, we focused on the role of technicians, pharmacy techs, radiology techs, surgical techs, and others. We talked about enrollment, capacity, the need that healthcare providers have, what's our demand and how do we best connect with potential students. So those exchanges are very high value. And then in early August, HILT did convene a national conversation on nursing pipeline strategies. It was really robust conversation. We had healthcare organizations and education institutions from 10 different states across the country. James, I think you're gonna put a link to that summary in the chat. We're going to dive deeper here locally into that conversation a little later in the agenda. But that was a really high impact discussion on an area where we're all facing some challenges there. And we'll also do a call for fall topics as well. So all of these activities that we bring to the HILT community, we need those ideas. So please, throughout the meeting today, if you have ideas for what we can focus on and bring to the forefront for the fall in terms of lunch and learns or an education exchange topic, a topic we haven't dived into yet as a HILT community, please share your ideas in the chat. And the next education exchange is going to be in October. So we do want to identify what would be most valuable to focus on. So I think that is the overview, and I think we're going to dive into our first topic. So without further ado, I'm going to pitch this over to Shauna Revkin and Consuelo Davis to give us an update on the Talent Pipeline Committee.
Awesome. Thank you, Wendy. Good morning, everyone. As Wendy mentioned, we have budgeted a bit more time for updates from the Talent Pipeline Committee at today's meeting, primarily because this is probably the committee that has been longest standing and most active over the lifetime of HILT, and we are sitting in a moment where we have some additional resources to help push some of this work forward. So it felt like the right moment for a little bit of a kind of recap on where we've been and a deeper dive into where we're headed, and just an opportunity to align as a collaborative group around the next steps and opportunities to become, engaged in different parts of that work. So the next slide, this will basically be an opportunity to review some of this work, as I mentioned, that's happened to date. And then we have, under the Talent Pipeline Committee, sort of over the course of our work, coalesced our strategies under what the kind of brand or title that we're calling Student Experience Package. And so we'll have an opportunity to get some updates on that. And then again, really want to get some feedback from the group and align on where we're headed. So just to anchor ourselves in where we're sort of coming from in this work, the Talent Pipeline Committee has really engaged, I think, in a few key areas over the last couple of years. And one big area of work has been around a career event. And I think when we first started talking about this, we didn't know what that was going to be, but we felt that it would be valuable to have an event that we owned collectively and engaged in collectively as an industry for the purposes of engaging, in particular, young people, students, high school students, even as young as middle school students, and those who are graduating from high school, and to some extent also even reaching into the college, in particular the community college system. And so many of you will remember an in-person, back in the days when we still used to do things in large groups indoors, an in-person event that was graciously hosted by CMAR. Was at the time not yet open museum in South Park. And that was in October 2019, huge day-long event, super successful. And then as we recalibrated during COVID and had the opportunity to partner with some of our peers in Pierce County, who were already leading the way in some of this similar types of work, HILT was able to engage in a virtual event in April 21. Both very explicitly focused in terms of outreach on schools and students in communities of color, in communities that have been historically under-resourced and in some cases marginalized. So a very explicit effort to target our outreach, to engage young people from communities throughout the Puget Sound. And I think we had close to or more than 400 participants at each of those events. So pretty big reach for the career events. It's a pretty mature part of the work that we've been doing. The second area is the Speakers Bureau. I think we acknowledged early on that there was a desire, there's a real desire in the K-12 system in particular, but also in community organizations to connect with industry, to connect individuals considering healthcare with real live people who are working in real live jobs in healthcare, and to create opportunities for more exposure and to create action steps for people that were informed by real information about what it looks like to work in healthcare. And the Speakers Bureau was an attempt to streamline that a little bit. So we've lived in a place, I think, where schools have reached out to individual healthcare organizations, and we as healthcare organizations have tried to create our partnerships. But sometimes there's a miss when there are so many different places where that information can be flowing. And so in this area, we've had the opportunity to create a pretty simple request form that now lives on the HILT site, so that if there are partners in the community or in the K-12 system, for example, who need speakers for a panel or a class discussion, or you name it, they can submit those requests through this form, and then our fabulous HILT conveners are able to push that out to the full membership, so that we are all able to kind of assess and plug into those things that are the right fit for us at the right time. And then the last two areas of focus have been a video clearinghouse or library and mentoring, both I think concepts that have been vetted over time and in different stages of maturation. I think the video event, the video clearinghouse, was an idea that came up pretty early, and we had some pretty active work on that, and it's sort of been paused a bit more recently. And then the mentoring concept emerged more recently, but has gained some momentum moving forward. So that's kind of how this student experience package that we've now named and have articulated a little bit more has kind of come to be over the last couple of years. And we're at this moment where we have, due to some grant funding, the ability to benefit as a collective from some dedicated staff support, which is very exciting. And so I'm really excited to introduce, many of you may have had the opportunity to meet Consuelo already. Others of you may not have yet. And so I wanted to take this opportunity to introduce Consuelo Davis, and also to hand things over to her to spend a little bit more time on where she sees us moving with all of this great work.
Thank you, Shauna, and thank you for partnering with me on the Talent Pipeline Committee and Student Experience Package. Good morning, everyone. I'm excited to be meeting with you all to introduce myself and share an update on HILT Student Experience Package and the work that I've been working on for the past 2 months. I'm coming from the public sector, where I've worked for nearly 20 years, most recently at the Port of Seattle as the Workforce Development Program Manager. For 5 years at the Port, I managed programs and developed partnerships to create equitable access to living wage careers in maritime, aviation, and construction, especially for people of color, women, and youth. Prior to the Port, I worked on communications and community engagement at the Puget Sound Clean Air Agency to reduce air pollution, protect public health and the environment, and curb our region's contribution to climate change. I'm here today as the HILT Career Engagement Director, thanks to a 1-year grant from Career Connect Washington that was obtained by Shireen Henry and Emily Yim at Washington Alliance for Better Schools in partnership with Ryan at SJI and Liesel and Marie Carose at the WDC. Oh, thank you, James, for the next slide. I'm also here today because of the great work that Shauna mentioned that the Talent Pipeline Committee did to create the student experience package. The SEP aims to provide industry-led experiences for BIPOC students underrepresented in the healthcare industry to learn from healthcare professionals about in-demand healthcare careers and pathways. I really love what the SEP is about and just read it from the screen. Normally I don't do that, but I'm just really excited to help build this model that can be used for other in-demand careers and to work with you on HILT's goal to improve access, equity, and diversity in our region's healthcare workforce. To tell you a bit more about my role with the SEP, I'll be facilitating the SEP committees and assisting the committee leads, identifying partners to promote the SEP to BIPOC students, collaborating with other career-connected learning professionals, such as John Bonner, who's on the call now, and Walter Jones and many others, and then to connect the SEP with career preparation and launch programs so that the students, once they get that awareness, they know where to go next, and much more. I won't go into the other duties as assigned part. So I'd like to share with you an overview of the grant deliverables and the draft SEP work plans. Feel free to interrupt me if you have any questions, or if you can save them for the Q&A session at the end. Next slide, please. Thank you. As Shauna mentioned earlier, the Career Connect Washington grant will help grow the SEP and expand it to include students in Snohomish County, as well as those in King and Pierce. The main grant deliverables that are due by June 30th, 2022 is to plan and offer a hybrid career event, so both in-person and virtual, and design a mentoring program and train 10 mentors, to create and promote a video library, to facilitate 60 speaker bureau activities. It's a lot, but we'll do it. To help manage these work streams, the grant includes funding for new technology platforms. James with SJI is the project lead and can present an update on these platforms in the near future. So that's an overview of the grant itself that I'm charged with delivering those deliverables by June 30th. I'd like to share with you an overview of what's planned for the career event and the rest of the SEP focus areas. So the first of the 4 work streams is the most developed work stream or focus area that HILT has, as Shauna mentioned. And I've learned about your successful in-person 2019 event and also learned about the 2021 virtual event that was made possible, both made possible with major support by the HILT network. The only additions or changes as planned for the event is to expand it to Snohomish County and incorporate some in-person activities. So I'm just building on the great work that's already been done for the career event. The event planning committee is meeting on September 7th and led by Stephanie Thompson, and Corey's on the line as well. And so we'll be meeting on September 7th to begin planning the 2022 event. So I'll have more information on that plan, on that event in the near future. But the career event does remain the biggest opportunity for HILT partners to participate in a robust event for underrepresented students to explore a variety of healthcare careers and pathways. The mentoring program. Thank you, Jane. So the second of the 4 work streams is the mentoring committee. That this program will connect students with healthcare professionals to provide an in-depth look into the healthcare industry, careers and pathways, and to encourage post-secondary enrollment in the healthcare industry. The mentoring committee, led by Rachel Andre with Seattle Colleges, is in process of designing a pilot program that includes training 10 mentors and developing a tech platform to match those mentors with students and much more. This committee is needing industry participation to weigh in on topics like the criteria for a mentor and the content for those mentoring sessions. The plan is to implement the pilot in the fall of 2022. Next slide, please. Hope I'm not going too fast. The third work stream is a video library. The HILT video library will use YouTube as the platform for hosting healthcare career-related videos. Thanks to James, the YouTube channel is live now. So if you have any existing career videos to add to the library, let us know in the chat or send me an email. We'll also be adding videos from the past career events, but the bulk of the work will be creating new videos of healthcare professionals about their personal pathway, journeys, and experiences. So besides creating those videos, the committee is needing industry participation to weigh in on topics like determining the content for the videos and helping to design that library. I'm already on the speakers wheel, the last work stream. This service, as Shauna mentioned, is available now. And for healthcare professionals to speak with students on topics aligned with middle and high school curriculum, even for CBOs to bring in guest speakers as well to talk with their clients. Over the next few months, we'll be transferring that online form that's on the HILT website to a new technology platform that will match a speaker with the request and much more. So really look forward to that technology assistance. And in addition to presenting to students, this committee is needing industry representation to weigh in on topics like the revised speaker profile and the overall program design. So that's that concludes my update on the work planned for the student experience package. These are draft plans as we are in the early stages of planning. So it's a perfect time for industry partners to get involved in developing and implementing these industry-led experiences for BIPOC students to learn from you and your company about in-demand healthcare careers and pathways. It's work that's rewarding. You'll still be helping people. You'll also be changing lives by helping to create these opportunities for BIPOC students to learn and pursue a living wage career in the healthcare industry. I look forward to partnering with you on HILT's goal to improve access, equity, and diversity in our region's healthcare workforce. Thank you very much for your time and attention. Shauna, I'll turn it back over to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Consuelo. Yeah, so this is just, that was a lot of information, kind of catching us up from where we've been and thinking forward to where we might head with some additional resources to support moving this work forward and potentially accelerating some of the pieces that we've been working on. This is really a point where we wanted to pause and have a little bit of an opportunity for questions, thoughts, discussions, concerns. We want to make sure that we are aligned as a HILT around, is this still the right work? This is the work that we have decided to collectively engage in, where we feel like our collective effort is can be most impactful from a talent pipeline perspective. And so really wanted to take a chance to have a little bit of discussion and hear from folks. Are there things missing? Are there questions, concerns, or other thoughts or ideas that we need to be thinking about incorporating? And also to take a moment for a real kind of a call to action, as so many things have been going on in our respective organizations, and some of us have been involved in parts of this work in the past, maybe not in other parts of the work that we want to be involved in. And so really sort of taking a moment to say, what do we individually as organizations want to engage in this greater body of work? So really wanted to open it up for thoughts, questions, reactions, what do we need to decide or think about together before we move forward?
Shauna, this is Suzanne Swadner. Nice to see you. I have first just a word of praise for how much work Consuelo is picking up and will continue to do an excellent job on. I wanted to just approach this really generally from the Healthcare Authority perspective, focusing on behavioral health. And I see that Charlotte Jones has weighed in about her interest in having and connecting with her DEI coordinator. I can't emphasize enough with the behavioral health workforce crisis that one of the universal messages we hear as we listen to our behavioral health agencies across the state is the work you're doing here is important around reaching out and gaining awareness and making behavioral health careers elevated in terms of the perspective and understanding of young students, and seeing this as a viable and desirable and important career pathway. I mean, I'm a nurse. You can see a nurse anywhere you go, but thinking about what behavioral health does is much more challenging. So I'm just chiming in. I'll connect probably with Charlotte just separately to see what she's thinking about. But I do want to think about whether elements of this model might be exportable or shareable as best practices in some other way to people who want to do this work around the state. I'm really pleased to see that you're working with Snohomish and Pierce through another set of grant funding. That's very important for the mission and work that you are doing, the work on the King County area, because it's really all one big blob, having lived for 30 years in that blob. But I do think it's important to think about how we might take best practices from people that I see on this list who are working with you that are very talented individuals and share those best practices around the state and figure out how to customize them to different kinds of communities and different kinds of behavioral health professions and awareness at different levels of the student experience. So thanks for sharing this. It's really interesting.
I'll have to, go ahead, Wendy.
Yeah, I was just going to lift up a question that came up in the chat that I noticed from, I think from Corey, around whether for the video library, whether we imagine collecting and using existing videos or if it's just for new content. So I'm not sure if we know the answer to that question, or we can maybe take that back to the committee, but I think that's a great question because I think we may all have some resources to potentially contribute.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and thanks for lifting that up, and Corey for your always, I think, a careful eye on being really maximizing and leveraging things that we have already. And so I do think the intention is to do a little bit of both. I think to some extent, while I think there are opportunities to develop some content that might fill some gaps that maybe don't exist, in some ways it almost feels like the focus of that work stream, and this is just me, this is not me speaking on behalf of the Talent Pipeline Committee, this is me speaking on behalf of Shauna, I think that the biggest challenge that we sometimes have with that kind of content is more the how do you make it accessible in a way that is curated for people so that it's not just a, completely just a scrolling exercise where you're just scrolling through videos and kind of going down the rabbit hole of not really sure why did I click on this one and what am I looking for? And so I think, while I do think there may be some, collecting existing video content and maybe some filling in the gaps where there needs to be new content, to some extent, to me, it feels like the biggest goal of this particular work stream area is to find a way to create a clearinghouse that is, organized in such a way that it makes it easier for students, teachers, counselors, community organizations to access some of that content in a way that is meaningful for the individual kind of user. So I think there's a lot of work to be done there because that is not a small, it's not a small effort.
Yeah, we've thought about how to do this as well as an area health education center. So, similarly to kind of what you guys have in the student experience package, we have the career events and we do provide speakers and organize people to come speak. We also, our partner in Eastern Washington has also provided online training for educators in the past. We have, kits that people can check out that has primarily come from the Eastern Washington AHEC. And then, we started experimenting with it a little bit last year with the science kits, though challenging in a virtual environment. And then of course we have the videos, and I put that in the link. You can kind of see what we're trying to do there as well. And then we have programs as well where we are connecting students to immersion experiences in rural and underserved communities. So very much, very similar to kind of what you're putting together here. And I think one of the things for us as far as that engagement piece and making it usable, as well as, not just, having this huge list of resources that then people have to kind of sort through, is I think it is really important to kind of invest in roles like kind of akin to like the care coordinator, right? That we, are becoming more familiar with and using more and more in healthcare, that we really need somebody that's like a student navigator or advisors who are trained to be able to use the resources, who are able to connect with the students, how we connect with other programs who also have those touch points with the student population that we're focused on, and having them be experienced with the resources. So I think that there's some ways to kind of, try to work more collaboratively so that whatever tools are being developed are kind of, it seems like what's really great here is we're seeing kind of some centralization of resources. But I think that, for the people that have the more regular contact with students, I think those are the folks that kind of need some information or training around use of the resources, so that there's kind of the maximization of those resources and it's not just a list online. The other things that we've thought about is with our Northwest Health Career Path projects, we have the database of programs that we're developing, as well as a student account. And the concept there is that students could also elect to sign up for like a newsletter is one of our ideas. And then we could you could potentially at that point, you could slowly like highlight, like a calendar of events. You could highlight videos that are new and coming out. So, we've been also trying to think through it. I can't say that we've, found the magic system or have this locked in or anything, but, we've also been trying to kind of think through it. So happy to also work together and see if there's some ways that from our collective research, we can kind of find some good ways forward.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Corey. And I think it speaks to a, really important kind of guiding principle, which is that we want to use our collective effort as not an organization, but a collaboration in the most efficient ways, right? So we want to put our energy behind the places where there are either gaps that need filling or places where we just really feel like we have the best opportunity to have impact as a collective in a way that we wouldn't individually. So I think that's a really important reminder. And I think one question I had that I'll throw out there, and I've been less involved in the mentoring aspect of the student experience package. And one of the questions that I had was if there's a pilot, if the pilot is the deliverable for this particular time frame, what are the what's sort of the evaluation or kind of assessment metrics? How would we determine whether that type of because that feels like a program, right? That's something that I'm less clear on how we would sustain something like that if it was successful. And so I'm wondering what are the mechanisms that we're embedding in that pilot to understand, what are the measures of success? How do we evaluate whether this is something new that fills a gap, or is it potentially duplicative of other things that are out there? So that's just a curiosity that I had around the mentoring piece. And I think that's largely because I've been less involved in that particular aspect of the student experience package. But in thinking about where we put our collective effort, we have a really robust and exciting work plan here. And I think we need a mechanism for evaluating whether we're being impactful, and do we continue to push on all fronts, or are there some spaces where we have better opportunity to have impact than others? And I'll just leave it open for any other, if anyone has any other questions or thoughts or kind of burning comments that they really want to have a chance to talk about here today. But also a reminder that with having Consuelo with us, we do have this great opportunity to have a bit of a centralized spot for keeping track of these things and the sort of responding to and doing some really good deep thinking about what we do next. So I want to remind people that we would love to hear any other thoughts today, but that there's an opportunity to continue to communicate with Consuelo.
Thank you, Shauna. And this is my last comment for you all is, I know that there might be some folks missing from today, and we'll follow up with an email on the opportunity to participate in these in the student experience package, so that we can have that industry perspective embedded in the designing of these programs, and to answer questions about like evaluation criteria and measures of success. So really would look forward to hearing from HILT members or HILT partners on who's available to meet and participate on these committees. We meet once a month for about an hour, hour and a half. And I do as much as I can to facilitate those meetings and push the work forward and keep us on task. And really look forward to having you at the table and joining the rest of the committee members in this work.
Yeah, so I think if folks, if there's no further discussion at this time, I would just encourage, if there are individuals on the call right now, I think I saw some activity in the chat already. If there's anyone else who wants to make sure they don't miss the opportunity to raise their hand to be involved in some of this, please put that in the chat. Please feel free to reach out to Consuelo directly. And as Consuelo mentioned, I think there will also be some follow-up. I think this is a great opportunity. Given all the things that are on everyone's plates, this is a great opportunity for us to reach out to the entire HILT membership to refresh who is most interested in being engaged in which aspects of this work. So feel free to throw additional questions or contacts in the chat. But in the meantime, I think we'll go ahead and switch gears. And I wanted to turn things over to Charlotte Jones, who we heard from briefly earlier from Sound, to provide us with a little bit of an update on the Behavioral Health Committee work. So I will turn it over to you, Charlotte.
Well, thanks. Good morning, everyone. So we have really, since, how long has it been? Since last September, we have been trying to gather different community health agencies together as far as part of this committee. And while we have a smaller group, I have to say thanks to Michael McKee from Healthier Here. He actually made a lot of introductions and gathered some interest from other agencies. So as we're building that, we recently gotten an update from Bonetta Barton, which I think she's on this call. So on kind of where we are with the 21 million, or where they are with the 21 million Balmer grant and how it's going to impact, the graduates. And as it's highlighted here, the 415 graduates, at least that's the goal of master level clinicians. And where we are at the moment, well, let me stick with what's on the slide. Most of this is to reduce the turnover rate, which we all know the workforce shortage that we have for behavioral health is huge, and the burnout that people are experiencing due to COVID and a lot of the other things that Wendy was mentioning earlier, that has been driving the staff turnover as well. So having something like this to be able to reduce that turnover is going to be a life-saving event, not only for the agencies, but for our clients. So, excuse me, I can't get rid of this cough today. The other is to create a better alignment between the graduate training and the behavioral health workplace demands. So that is where I think the partnership is really going to take off, because it does blend those two things together. And I know that there are things that multiple committees throughout HILT as well as outside of HILT are trying to address that. But I think having a committee that is well focused on building and being that bridge with the behavioral health agencies that this particular the scholarship fund is going to focus on, which, and Vanetta, feel free to correct me if I say something incorrectly, but they have decided to focus on the community behavioral health agencies that receive Medicaid funding. You know, being from Sound, who we are Medicaid funding, that is a great thing. And what will happen now, and it may have already been happening, is working with the 13 different universities. And if I leave out a university, I apologize. But it's Antioch, Central, City, Eastern, Gonzaga, Pacific Lutheran, Seattle Pacific, Seattle, UW Tacoma, Walla Walla, Western, Wentworth. As far as the different colleges in which they will be focusing on for those graduates to go into, and I think it's the Quick Start 1-year program. Is that correct, Bonetta?
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Okay. So I'm going to take that as a moment. If Bonetta, if you want to add anything that I've left out, don't feel pressured that you have to. But the next step for this is that I'm going to follow up on what Michael has started for me, and we will schedule a meeting of some of those agencies to encourage them to be a part of this behavioral health committee, so that we can continue to partner with Vonetta and team, that we can ensure that this Quick Start gets off the way that it needs to be, and that we can actually support where it's going to go and how it's ultimately going to impact our communities. So, Vonetta, is there anything else you want to add?
Thank you, Charlotte. The only thing I'll add is that we are, it's been a little slow going with graduation and vacations. We are definitely, you know, fostering and cultivating the relationships with the 13 universities, and more information will come in, of course, an upcoming meeting specifically with the Behavioral Health Committee. So it's slow moving, but people are very, very excited, and I'm glad to be here today. So thank you.
All right, is there any questions that anyone has about anything that I've mentioned thus far? All right. I guess with that, I guess I will turn it over to Ryan. Now, I will say, even though we just talked about behavioral health, anti-racism journey, you know, because I am the Diversity, Equity, Justice, and Inclusion Officer for Sound, I think this is phenomenal. So Ryan, I'm going to give it to you.
Good deal. Well, thanks, Charlotte. And I'm channeling my my best impression of DJ3 today. He is, fortunately, we hope, on some well-deserved time off and not able to join us, but we definitely look forward to having his energy back as we get into our fall meeting. So continuing to work around anti-racism, the captain's team had a meeting a couple weeks ago, and really trying to hone down and take some of the amazing ideas that came out of the summer meeting. So we had Healthier Here that came in, shared some of the things that they are doing with their particular emphasis on patient outcomes and addressing health equity from that particular lens, and how their granting process is building in anti-racism components and equity outcomes into their work, and then as well as some of the capacity building that they've been doing within their organization. So we generated a whole bunch of really great ideas from that at the summer meeting. And so sifting through that, there were really kind of three things that really rose to the top. So the first one was really to establish for our HILT network some racial equity values, specifically around the recruitment, hiring, and retention practices and advancement that we can all agree on in the network. And then second is create that common learning. Are there other places or other organizations? And while HILT may be the best healthcare network out there in the country, particularly in next-gen sector strategies, we like to think so. It's not to say that we couldn't learn from other folks that are doing similar work to us. And so can we look at some of those things and be able to implement those processes there? And then finally, in terms of really moving some of that sustainable action, it's around creating a toolbox of resources. One of the things that came up in the conversation is that every organization was in a little bit of a different spot. Some organizations had already developed some dashboards and some metrics that they were looking to track that included the workforce component as well as some of the patient equity outcomes. And other organizations were still kind of in that formative phase in doing that. So having that toolbox of things, we think will help us to meet our network members where they're at and be able to provide some of those useful tools and support mechanisms to help organizations continue to advance in this really important critical work. So again, thanks to everybody for participating in the conversation. Particular shout out to Kevin from Sound for joining us and sharing his immense expertise and wisdom. It always makes our conversations richer with his deep background and expertise for that. So thanks for all the partners, and more to come on this, but that's just the quick update for today. All right, and I think we are now about ready to pass the baton over to our guest speaker. And Denise, Denise is on today. Denise, I'll pass the baton over to you.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. So next up is our impact of COVID-19 on the nursing workforce and our 2021 findings. Today's speakers are Sophia Argon, who is the Executive Director of Washington Center for Nursing, and Jenny Nguyen, who is our Survey Information Analytics. Do we have both speakers on?
This is Jenny. Hi, it's nice to meet everyone. I think I just received an email from Sophia that she's not able to attend, or she might pop in if she can. So I'll just go ahead and get started and share my screen with the presentation on the research that we conducted for the Washington Center for Nursing, and leave some time at the end for some questions and answers.
Great.
Let's see.
Hey, Jenny, yep, you got it.
There you go. All
yep.
Right.
We can see that. Thanks, Jenny.
Of course. So as I said, my name is Jenny Nguyen. I run Survey Information Analytics. I am also a teacher at Western Washington University. I'm a sociologist doing a lot of surveys, research, and working with different nonprofit organizations and government agencies and organizations on impact evaluation, data collection, different types of data collection. Survey Information Analytics is a small minority woman-owned business research firm whose goal is to bridge the gap between people, organizations, and decision-making through advanced research methods and data collection tools. We engage in this work with Washington Center for Nursing, and this actually came about a project that started kind of last summer in kind of assessing what type of data is available through a lot of phone conversations before developing this research project. So the research data collection for this project actually occurred in February and March of this year. About 418 survey participants. Participants received a $5 Amazon gift card incentive. And then focus groups, about nine focus groups via Zoom. Across participants were about 67 participants across different sectors of nursing, of course. And today's presentation, I'm just providing some of the key findings in the overview, but really there's a whole report that the Washington Center for Nursing has shared or is made public that can be shared later on as well. So some of the key findings 51% of those surveyed experienced being laid off or furloughed from one or more nursing or healthcare related jobs in 2020. 42% thought about or made plans to leave the field of nursing. 69% reported moderate or extreme staffing concerns due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And 61% were moderately or extremely concerned about the safety of friends and family. %42% believe that their employers provided adequate quarantining for employees who may have been or were exposed to COVID-19. 67% agreed or strongly agreed that they were providing more telehealth nursing services due to the pandemic compared to pre-pandemic services. And 35% felt that they've been discriminated against in their primary nursing role because of their accent or language barriers. Survey respondents and focus group participants highlighted the inconsistent and varied availability of and guidance regarding PPE in nursing workplace settings in 2020. 48% of survey respondents indicated they were moderately or extremely concerned about their own safety, and 61% reported they were moderately or extremely concerned about the safety of their friends and family. 54% of survey respondents reported providing home care without pay during 2020. For example, caring for elderly, persons with disabilities, homeschooling, etc., as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. Here we see a chart of concerns regarding COVID-19 safety and PPE. Over half of the respondents, about 63%, were moderately or extremely concerned about accessing reliable and credible information about COVID-19. About 60% were concerned, oops, sorry about that. I'm trying to see if I can minimize this, about adequate test kits and training during the pandemic or during 2020. So some key themes that kind of emerged during the focus groups in the 9 sessions that we hosted were about around transparency and communication, behavioral health and burnout, diversity and equity, policies around PPE and how to kind of plan for the future, role position changes and adaptations, like additional roles that nurses were taking on during that time, and job and financial security. I have worked in long-term care for 2 years, and going through the pandemic has made me consider leaving, not nursing, but into a different area of nursing. As a result of the pandemic, 33% thought about or planned to leave their nursing employer for another. 42% thought about or planned to leave the field of nursing. 25% transitioned from one nursing unit position role to another. 22% have temporarily left the nursing workforce. And nearly 1/4 of survey respondents retired or thought about retirement earlier than originally planned as a result of the pandemic. Some days I'm here and helping people. Other days I look at my partner and they're working from home and make twice as much as I do. And I am like at my max as to what is acceptable for me to be exposed to COVID. My friends are not stoked about being around me either. I'm like this vector. That was a really long way of saying, I'm really jealous of everyone else who gets to work from home. It's such a privilege, not just because I'm in healthcare, but all the essential workers. Many make less than I am and still have PPE issues. For a second, I was like, maybe I should just go get my MBA instead. Nurses experiencing layoffs or furloughs in 2020 from those that participated in the survey. Slightly more than half of survey respondents, 51%, were laid off or furloughed from one nursing or healthcare related job, at least one nursing or healthcare related jobs in 2020. Of those who were furloughed or laid off, 83% reported that these were COVID related, consequence of COVID-19 pandemic. Self-care was very difficult in the beginning. Every day I would go in, I would be so stressed. I do not even have family here. And what will happen to my kids if I get sick? Am I sacrificing my own kids for my profession? I have my responsibility to my kids. My family overseas was so stressed. My family was like, you leave the job. And I did not. I just cannot leave it. When I would come home, I strictly made the rule that I would not bring my bag from work. Drinking, I put on some weight. After hours, I'm looking for that glass of wine. I'm not motivated to go out for a walk. I don't have a lot left for my family, so my self-care goes out the door. I can second that. At the beginning of the pandemic, it was wine, community. That's how I usually unwind, and it's not there. I was so stressed out and I didn't receive support from my company, so I had to quit my job. I feel better. As nurses, we want to be valued, respected, and protected. Our health system would value health workers more. I found a job with less stress, more pay, and more support. A consistent problem that everyone has to identify is that there is an absence of transparency. You can talk about radical transparency as an institution. I think it is okay to say we don't have the information, but with that information going through so many different sources, it seems like there's a lack of one place to gather the information. And then of course, in terms of the education aspect, it feels like you're getting cheated out of an education because you're paying the same amount, but it's like all they can offer based on guidelines and restrictions. During the fall, we were able to go back to clinicals. So we didn't have to do sims, but we only had like 2 days to go into the lab, but we feel less prepared than students in the past. So it felt really rushed and we were grateful we got anything at all, but you feel less prepared and you wonder how it will affect you in the long run as a nurse. I think that the word I can use to describe the last year is chaos, constant change, and constant adaptation, a high level of uncertainty, a year of challenge. So a lot of nursing programs were facing different changes in terms of the curriculum and how to implement in those aspects. So then some recommendations. One of the things that kind of comes to mind when I was reading through the report again and preparing for this presentation in terms of the higher ed aspect is to really raise the question of how do we retain and maintain or hire long-term faculty during this crisis, but also behavioral health recommendations, increased awareness and education about mental health, customizable and flexible mental health treatment, multiple modalities of intervention, video, telephone, online forums, and the timing of intervention is critical. And we had someone with a mental health background lead some of the focus groups. And one of the things that came about was some of these nurses. So while depending on their role, they had access to counselors and therapists, but because of their work hours, they might not be able to access those services. And in addition, during 2020, a lot of counselors and therapists, mental health therapists were at capacity and not taking in new clients. Other recommendations, frequent breaks during shifts, shorter shifts, peer and team support, that aspect of community that came about within the research. Create safe spaces for sharing traumatic stories. One of the things that came about during the focus group that was shared quite often was thank you for the opportunity to share some of these and hear from other nurses their experiences so that you're not feeling so alone or isolated during this pandemic. And nursing managers to engage in peer support in terms of workplace policies and practices. And I will go ahead and pause there for questions and comments.
I did see a question in the chat from Andrea. Jenny, do you have a sense of which nursing fields, hospital care versus long-term care, are experiencing the most turnover workforce shortages, or is it all of them?
I don't have the specific numbers. I think it's referenced somewhat in the report on the different sectors that are reported to DOH, but not clear numbers in that sense. And I think it's across the board for the most part. We're here in terms of long-term care. The discussion is a lot of, the pay aspect and the workload during that time. So we're seeing the shortage in long-term care. And then in hospital care is really a lot of also the burnout and depending on where nurses are located as well. So a lot of different characteristics go into that.
Thanks, Jenny.
And Jenny, I did have a question that came to mind. I was one of the statistics that jumped out from the survey was 1/3 of nurses facing a discrimination based on their accent or how they speak. Was that from patients, or is that from peers and supervisors, or was that not disaggregated?
So that wasn't aggregated in that sense, or separated in that sense. But what we did was we did follow up in terms of the focus groups. And when we asked that question, it came from kind of everybody. So it's not just it's peers, but it's also patients. And I think one of the things that kind of came up among nurses who identified as like Asian Americans with their accent as well in some of the groups was, you know, there's this idea of during the time being called the China virus. And what that reflected in terms of the workplace and how they engaged with patients during that time.
Got it. Okay, thank you. Appreciate that.
Hi, this is Corey from AHEC. Just kind of building on what Joanne also put here in the chat about behavioral health resources being stretched then, and you know, if there were any recommendations that came out of the focus groups about alternatives to address burnout. I just wondered too if there was any discussion about programs that were really helpful or models we should look at for, I don't know, like peer support or anything like that that came out of the research?
I think one of the biggest thing that came out is providing that space, that safe space for nurses to share their experiences working during the pandemic. And what that safe space looks like might vary from employer to employer, or maybe it is hosted by a different organization. For example, hey, this is a coffee time or lunchtime where nurses can log in, or just alternating those times. I think what was helpful, hearing from our mental health person that facilitated the focus groups for the very reason, she was saying that, you know, it offered a venue for nurses to voice their concerns, and maybe it's not, you know, one-on-one nursing or one-on-one mental health facilitation or counseling, but it's like a group aspect and what that looks like.
You know, what I thought was alarming was the 42% that thought about leaving the industry, and we already have a shortage. And so this really just really put a critical, make this a critical mass for us in terms of recruitment and developing that pipeline. And then 22% actually left the workforce. And so half of the 42, I guess, that we're considering it actually followed through. So that's very alarming to me.
Yeah, and you brought up a great aspect to me. It's like the pipeline is very concerning. And just this, of course, provides just a snapshot of what's happening in 2020 and asking nurses to reflect on those experiences. But when we're talking about the pipeline and the nursing workforce, and we're seeing students currently feeling discouraged and faculty and what that looks like. In some places are faculty retiring, and those numbers and those statistics, just looking across the board, for example, and what that looks like. And as someone who teaches at the university, you know, what does it mean to hire short-term staff in that sense? And then what does it mean to hire short-term staff when students are feeling overwhelmed and burnt out and not prepared? So those different preparations, and how do you maintain and retain nurse educators who are now, okay, maybe I'm going to retire. I'm at that time, I can retire, or hire new nurse educators who can be long-term. I see there's a few other questions popping up.
Yeah, Suzanne, I see, has her hand up. Suzanne?
Thank you. Lisa, that was a great question, because I have a similar kind of follow-up question. Those numbers in that slide were kind of shocking. And the 42 is that you've mentioned is the most shocking to me. Do we have anywhere, Jenny, and this may be something that you don't have awareness of, do we have any way to compare that to how many people, for example, have turnover, plan to leave, plan to switch to other specialties in what would have been previously considered a normal time? In other words, pre-COVID.
I unfortunately don't have those numbers. That's a great question, and that'll be a great comparison because the survey was online, and it's for people who can't access the survey to take it. It was made widely available, but I don't have those numbers, and I wonder if that's something the Center for Nursing is tracking, and I don't have an answer to that at this point.
That's the other people I'm thinking about, and Ryan, I saw you shaking your head, and Corey, I'm wondering about this with you, and Dan too, is I'm wondering if Sue Skillman and the Center for Health Workforce Studies might know if that's something that gets collected. It's certainly in that bucket of things I ask about have that are kind of unusual or not in the typical norm of things that get asked. But we could ask if there's any way to estimate that. If not, there's still some really useful numbers to give us a baseline to start from.
Mm-hmm. And definitely keep an eye on. Yeah. Diane.
Yeah, thank you. And good morning, everybody. Diane Sosney here with SEIU Healthcare 1199 Northwest and a nurse, psych nurse. So I also wear the hat of a board member of Washington Center for Nursing and have heard this presentation a number of times. Thank you, Jenny, for your research and sharing that today. You know, this is not normal. The turnover and burnout and stress on nurses, and particularly frontline nurses, whether they be in long-term care, acute care, even ambulatory or home health hospice. It has, aside from just sort of the general cycle, ebb and flow of nurses coming in to the profession and retiring, it's the pandemic. And this has been a year and a half now, almost going on 2 years of unbelievable pain and stress and hardship on the whole healthcare team. But let me just speak for a second about nursing. It's been unrelenting. And just as we, you know, think, oh, the first wave, we're going to get through that. We've got the vaccine, then we have a second and third wave. And what we've been talking about in our union with our members, as well as with major employers in the state, is if we do not collectively, as a industry, as stakeholders, et cetera, do more together individually to get people vaccinated, I don't see a good outcome here. Nurses are going to leave. It's too much. And depending on what happens with schools, I was talking to somebody yesterday about this. You know, we're all fingers crossed and toes crossed that, you know, schools are going to open and we're not going to see a shutdown where nurses and other healthcare providers are going to have to deal with online education yet again for kids. So I think we should acknowledge that. We should make a joint commitment to do everything, and maybe even have a subcommittee of interested stakeholders from this group talk about that, because we're headed into a fall where, you know, we've got the Delta variant, you know, raging. We've got flu season and potentially other variants coming down the pike if people don't get vaccinated. So let me stop there. Thanks.
Well, the only thing I can say to that is amen.
And this is Suzanne. Thank you for really articulating really well what I know in my heart when I ask my question about numbers, is the pain point and it's beyond pain point.
Yeah.
Do we need to think more about, as we communicate about COVID and the vaccine, and this is a question I would have for colleagues in public health who may be on the phone. Do we need to think more about communicating the impact and burden of this illness on top of flu in the winter season? I saw an interesting study from McKinsey that was doing some analysis of what the burden of illness was, and was it changing based on where we were last year, and how is it going to change it with the variants as you described. And through the magic of amazing data, which Jenny knows about, the data shows, first off, that we are going to greatly exceed the expected levels of disease because of the variant and the potential for future variants. But they also made the point that that was on top of flu impact. And so I like you don't know how to find the magic point that will stress this to people who have concerns in interesting ways, but I do think that people are thinking just about COVID as a burden and then not thinking about the additive effect of COVID on top of what people deal with every day in an already overburdened system.
Well, Diane, again, I mean, one thing, I appreciate people's comments in the chat. I think that within this coalition, we should have a statement that we put out about this, about the vaccinations and COVID, because we now are, all dealing with the governor's mandate. And we did a town hall meeting this week and had over 1,000 members from throughout the state of Washington on. And we had people who are very much pro-vaccine and people who were not, that reflect the general population. And these are healthcare workers. It was really interesting to hear what the concerns are. We believe as an organization, we can partner and help to get the numbers up around folks who are hesitant, who have, I mean, you guys know the gamut of people, not going to let government tell me what to do, I'm going to leave, to concerns about what the vaccine does. Yesterday, we have a safety strike going on at Cascade Behavioral Health. Some of you may know about it. I was on the picket line with a member yesterday who's Ethiopian immigrant who has not been vaccinated and was telling me that his church, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, is not recommending vaccines because of a number of things, including what's in it, dietary restrictions. And we had a great conversation. I said, that's information we can get you. People have concerns about impact on child bearing. And I mean, it's amazing, the gamut. And these are from healthcare workers. So I just think we have to prioritize this, double down, and provide collectively. Everybody here in their own organizations have been dealing with it. Let's put together the best practices, the best educational tools, etc., so that because I just can't see how we can say, let's deal with one branch of the pipeline and the workforce without getting our arms around this. Thanks.
Thank you, Diane. Let's see. Any other comments or questions about the survey results? Okay, well, let's move on to the next section. First of all, thank you, Jenny. This was wonderful for you to bring this information. It was very timely for us to get an idea of what's happening with our nurses and their mindset, what they've experienced. Looks like we definitely have some work to do based on what Diane is sharing, as well as something that wasn't called out is that the nurses feel that they're not being valued, respected, or protected. And so I just think that we all need to consider how this is impacting their world and what we can do as a collective to address that. So moving on to the next section is our next features discussion is around nursing pipeline strategies for HILT to pursue. And this is forward thinking, given that we do have an immediate need right now with addressing COVID. There are some things we do need to look ahead at and discuss how we address this and any ideas that we have to attack this. So we're looking at 5 strategies. Funding for more adjunct nursing professors and teachers, aggressive burnout prevention strategies, better accelerated training for junior nurses in critical years, first 2 years, better accelerated internal training for CNAs or other lower skilled professionals, and that includes supports, and then leadership and specialty training for experienced nursing. So here's some discussion questions to consider. What stood out from the WCN report? And we just talked about what were some concerns there. What are implications on needed strategies? Let's talk about that for a minute. It's particularly on the burnout prevention strategies, since that's what the report is saying to us, is that, they're burnt out, they're tired of fighting this fight, it's no end in sight, and they're lacking support.
Yeah, this is Corey from AHEC again. I'm wondering if, one of the things that stood out to me was the increase in telehealth, which really is not like surprising, but at the same time, I wonder, is it a source of stress that they're having to do more work via telehealth, and how that changes their work and engagement with patients, training issues, limitations, or was it actually a relief to have some time scheduled offering telehealth services versus in-person care? Is there a balance of how we structure their workflow so that there's some time with in-person and some, I don't know, is it relief through telehealth? And then I guess for me, that opens up, some other questions about telehealth training and how that can be structured possibly to address other workforce issues, especially around distribution, where we have, in particular rural areas or remote areas that have even more critical needs around nursing shortages. So I'll leave it there because I don't really know the answer to the first question, really, because maybe telehealth is a stressor, and that's not where we want to spend our energy. But
well, I think that's interesting call out, Corey. I had not personally heard that telehealth was a stressor. Has anybody else have anything connected to that? Any data or personal experiences around telehealth being a stressor?
We actually asked that on the survey as well, in the report that Brenda just sent from WCN. So we asked, if they were prepared or did they have the resources they need for telehealth services, even though the increase in telehealth services. And what we found was, for the most part, people felt, at least over half of the participants felt that they were prepared for telehealth services and they had the resources they need from their employer. So not necessarily a direct question on stressors, but just knowing that they had a kind of like a more smooth transition to telehealth. But it could be that some of these employers already had telehealth practices in place prior to the pandemic as well.
I mean, anecdotally, just from friends that work in healthcare, for some that had some responsibilities in telehealth or a change in kind of the balance of time with patients and providing telehealth services, some of them found that to be a relief. So, I guess I wonder about that. I don't, I can't say that, we're able to address kind of all of our workforce needs by dividing up everybody's time between telehealth and in-person care, especially when we're looking at inpatient care. But just a thought.
This is Brenda with WCN, and I'm sorry. I just want to add real quick that I just recently finished an interview with a nurse for our next newsletter, and she was transitioned to telehealth, and this is just one person's experience. and telehealth for the pandemic. And she felt that the care she was able to provide was not as sufficient and robust. She said, I can talk to my client, but I can't see them. I can't, do the physical examinations. She's like, I even learned things about the health of my client through the smells in the air. And so for her, she said, well, I felt lucky that I had an opportunity to switch to telehealth, but ultimately felt that she left that position to move to an in-person clinical job where she's at now. So I just want to share, that's a single person's experience. But
hi, this is Martia Shans with Swedish, and just a couple of comments. Corey, thank you for bringing up the question about the burnout and what it's related to, and can you interchange bedside with telehealth? So a couple of points on that. One, my first question was really around delving a little bit deeper into the burnout and just digging into that and trying to understand, is it truly about, I think I heard saw one of the comments that said, I'm jealous that some of my friends are able to be at home with their families, whereas I'm constantly having to be at work, which then begs the question, is telehealth the answer? And as Brenda just said, no, not necessarily. That's been my experience. And even prior to coming to Swedish, what I have found in my past experience, and then even working as a consultant, telehealth presents a whole other challenge. I actually wrote a white paper to present around technology in healthcare, and it was specifically related to telehealth and the challenges around that, and how an entire skill needs to be, a workforce skill needs to be developed around telehealth because of the technological challenges, not necessarily for nursing, but for the patients who either have lack of access, who are not, don't have the IT capabilities and so forth. Something that I witnessed with my mom, who had a telehealth appointment. It took her 20 minutes, going back and forth with the nurse and the physician to get on the call. And the nurse was so frustrated, she wanted to end the call. And were it not for me advocating for my mom, the appointment would not have gone through. So, sometimes the technology worked, the nurse was frustrated, and then that adds another level to the nurse's frustration and the burnout and so forth. So I just wonder if telehealth is the answer, and more about, can we look at things like days off, or looking at changing out schedules where sometimes you're at the bedside and sometimes you're doing paperwork. I'm sorry, there's sirens in the background. Something's happening here on the waterfront. But if we can adjust schedules that gives people a break to move away from the front lines so that you get a breather. And this now comes to organizations like mine, where we have to be creative in giving people a break to just step away for a moment, and be creative with our scheduling, and be creative with how we look at direct care. And for me, I think those are the types of solutions, because I think telehealth just breeds a whole other set of challenges.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that, Martia. Diane, you've had your hand up for a while.
Thanks, Denise. So I think this is a great discussion, and Marty, I think you hit on some really important aspects as our healthcare system is changing. Even pre-pandemic, the move to telehealth and the use of technology and monitoring patients, even pretty sick patients at home and through distance, and especially in rural areas, was moving through the process of, trying to get it more perfected. But I think that we, one thing I've heard, and this came up because I think Kaiser, Denise, because so many of our folks were able to work remotely because it's in ambulatory care settings, is with childcare issues and kids home from school. And, how do you balance your time at home where you're working and you may not have a designated, your house is only so big and housing costs, and it's not like you can just stick the kids here and go into a separate room to do your work. So I think there's a lot of factors. I'm optimistic that those can be managed. I think we just have to name them and come up with strategies, and there are, on what some of the best practices are. We need to make sure everybody, all communities, and this gets into the issue around racism and using a racial justice lens, is everybody has to have access to good broadband and have the equipment to be able to access healthcare that way. The federal government, there's some monies for that, but we need more of that. But I think educational programs for patients and educational tutorials, et cetera, for staff are ways to address how to make best use of that technology. I believe Kaiser, and I don't know, Denise, if you have the statistics, I know a high percentage of patients really liked being able to do care remotely.
Yeah, I don't have those statistics in front of me, available, but we had a reaction when we first started rolling out telehealth, where the patients weren't, I guess, probably those that didn't have the technology available, resented having to have the, telehealth first as a first option, as opposed to seeing their provider in person. So it's a mixed bag, and I think it probably has to do with what the accessibility and the technology at home, and their preference and their personal preference. I think that, so we backed off in KP on this and let the person decide, and they're having a little bit more flexibility around that. They're choosing telehealth first. Is very convenient. You don't have to drive to urgent care for something minor. But more critical stuff, people are going to go in-house for. So she said learning how to integrate the system. But I do agree, Diane, on educational programs for both the patient and for the staff. Looking at a time check, it looks like these top 5 strategies aren't where we're working toward. We're kind of leaning in this conversation towards something that's not an option on this page, and want to know if we should we be looking at this, or should we take a step back? What are your thoughts? Because one of the questions is that, which would your organization join forces on of these 5? Better accelerated internal training for CNAs or lower skill professionals? These things are all needed, but what is most critical right now that we should be focusing our time together on?
This is Brenda with WCN again, and I'm just wondering if there's a way, for WCN, I see leadership and specialty training for experienced nurses as something that we already work hard on and could support. And then, of course, aggressive burnout prevention. And to marry those two, in what ways can we provide leadership and specialty training for nursing leaders and experienced nurses to help the group dynamic on the floor or in a clinical care environment to address and prevent burnout in the environment, if those two could be related somehow.
I think that's a great point, Brenda. Not only burnout, but just their mental health, you know, as part of the burnout, but, you know, that feeling supported when they are there is all part of, you know, that you care, demonstrating, finding a little bit more time as a leader to demonstrate to your staff that you care about them, you know, and you care about their mental health and how they're feeling about from day to day. So that's something that we're looking at KP for sure. Anybody else have any thoughts?
This is Martia. I think absolutely, Brenda. And then the third piece that I would add to it, just so that we look at it from a longer term strategy, would be number 4, so that there can be, you know, old Chinese proverb that more hands make the work lighter. And so as you start to build the pipeline and put more people into the pipeline and start to be able to distribute the work, that helps with the burnout, because as much as you can encourage someone, ultimately to try to take some of the burden off of their plates.
Okay. Thank you, Susanna.
I'll just add that I think from the education perspective, whenever we can align our efforts to build kind of resilient students in health workforce, we ultimately are able to build a stronger long-term workforce. Mm-hmm. So I know that the Colorado Center for Nursing has done a lot of work in developing a grit and growth mindset curriculum. And I think if our industry partners are really, really wanting to develop that kind of resiliency training and ask the training partners, the colleges, to kind of, I don't know, provide seeding for those concepts, and we align our efforts there, I think that'll really go a long way.
Yes, it would, Dan. Thank you. That would also help with hanging in there, you know, and not wanting to bail out of the industry. This is a tough job. It's a very tough job. Yeah. Is that a curriculum right now at all? Resiliency?
It's the grit and growth curriculum out of the Center for Nursing in Colorado is available.
Okay. Ryan, how are we doing on time?
So looks like I got about 10 minutes left here. So I think probably some good, I don't want to say last thoughts, because I think this is the start of a conversation, and then we can close up with any last, and then a preview of what we have on tap for fall.
Okay, thank you. I see in the chat, there's, hold on, let me move the chat real quick. So Shauna's having difficulty with her audio, but she wanted to share that the call with national peers keyed in on some opportunities like nurse tech role that allow near-term pipeline ops, as well as student engagement, because students are working and applying skills during their training. Yeah. Yeah, that's good. And that's also critical, is to be able to have that hands-on and apply those skills. So thank you, Shauna, for sharing that. What do you think? So it looks like it sounds like what we're hearing is that we're going to focus our attention and time on the leadership and specialty training combined with the burnout, in terms of how we, as part of the training, addressing those burnout issues, and learning, figuring out a way to distribute the work and balance that balance that burden of workload. So what do you think would be our first steps together? Maybe perhaps determining which ones require collaboration.
Well, this is Brenda with WCN again, and I know we didn't mention it, but number one, funding for more adjunct nursing professors and teachers. You know, that is going to be key. That has, you know, that's going to be right now a 2-year RN clinical nurse makes more than a professor, and we're not going to be able to recruit and retain the nursing professors that we need to graduate the number of nurses that we'll need in the future unless that funding is addressed. So I would say that's a good one to cooperate on as well. I'm sorry, I know we did not mention that yet so far in the conversation.
Okay. Thank you.
I also have to wonder if career and technical educators would be really good partners on this too, to really try to do more along the pipeline side. I mean, we certainly are going to have to continue to work on our nursing workforce shortage. And some of this will need to be kind of grow your own. My other comment would be to, you know, I know that most of this work is focusing around King County and possibly Snohomish and Pierce potentially for this group, but I hope you will think of your rural and remote partners and any models or work that you guys develop and its ability to be used in those areas where they really have some severe shortages. So.
Okay. Okay, well, it sounds like that we have, I think we have a really good start here on what we need to do and how we probably should be restructuring our committees in terms of our focal point for 2022 or this moving forward. So I will wrap this up by thanking everybody for their input. This was a really good discussion, very, very fruitful. I apologize if I wasn't able to get to everyone in the chat. And so we will definitely take all that was shared in the chat as well as we start to formulate our next steps. And so the following things I want to share with you is that, well, actually, before I even wrap up with what we have coming up, is that I just want to say what I've heard is that we have a critical situation here and an opportunity among us and bring our forces together to address some immediate needs before we can even focus on a future for our nursing industry. So all of your input, the data that we shared gives us great a roadmap of where we'll take next. And so our upcoming events include in September 28th, we have our support partner meeting that includes education and training and governance. On October 14th, HILT Fall Education Information Exchange will be healthcare providers and 2 to 4 year colleges. We also have on November 18th, our fall quarterly meeting, and that will include everyone. Watch out for nursing pipeline work group and peer exchange events and additional opportunities to support employees during these stressful times. So are also coming soon. So that's what we'll key in, hopefully with what we just recently discussed. So I just want to thank everyone for your dedication and hard work in this space, and look forward to our next conversation and continue on with our meeting some solutions to these problems. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks everyone for joining today, and just some key dates that are up there. The invites will be coming out soon from your friendly convener team. Look forward to seeing everybody in the fall, and hopefully everybody is able to join some of our regulars out on vacation as summer comes to a close. And hope everybody stays safe and is doing well. Look forward to seeing everybody at our next events.